Oftentimes on this channel, I'll cover disappearances that offer no satisfying conclusions. These are mysteries that have baffled the world and continue to baffle the world to this day. But for every cliffhanging story I share, there are equally interesting disappearances that have actually been solved. 2019 saw its fair share of these solved disappearances, with these three being a few of the most interesting. In December of 1994, 9-month-old Alicia Stencil was in the care of a family friend named Dee. Dee took in the child for a short amount of time in order to allow Alicia's mother, Toni, some time to work on herself. Toni was 36 years old and going through a significant rough patch in her life at the time. She was heavily involved in drugs and worked as a prostitute in order to provide for her children. This lifestyle clearly made her unfit to raise her 9-month-old child, Alicia, and so it was assumed that Dee was the best option to care for her at the time. However, on the 19th of December, Toni went back to find Dee and to take her baby back, only to discover that they both were gone. Dee had vanished, along with her baby. Months of searching for the baby turned into years as the case slowly faded into obscurity. And just some months after her baby had presumably been kidnapped, Toni's body was discovered in an alleyway with clear evidence that she had been murdered. And much like the disappearance of Alicia, Toni's case quickly went cold. And from an outsider's perspective, it seemed highly likely that the murder and the kidnapping were both linked. Perhaps Toni had made enemies with the sketchy life that she was living, and maybe someone had kidnapped her baby as an act of revenge. And then perhaps they took it even further by eventually killing her just months later. In looking at the early reports, I feel like the few that were actually paying attention to the case probably thought that this is exactly what happened. Because after all, living a life that dangerous, enemies can be made very easily. I would know. Just kidding. But despite this seeming to be a solid theory, no new evidence or leads came forward in the case for many years. And it wasn't until 2016 that the case finally began to gain some momentum. In 2014, a lady in the Phoenix area contacted authorities about the freezing cold case. She stated that she was adopted and she didn't know the whereabouts of her original family, yet she had some suspicions that she may in fact be Alicia Stencil. And in 2018, DNA tests would actually prove her to be correct. Finding Alicia revealed that she wasn't kidnapped and that she had actually been passed around between multiple families and eventually wound up in protective services. So the whole time that authorities were looking for this little girl, she was actually in their care. This revelation also revealed that Alicia's mom, Toni, did not report her missing until March of 1995, a whole 3 months after she disappeared, which may be a testament of just the kind of mother that Toni was. Now, the fact that Alicia had spent so much time in police care without her ever being properly identified is shocking, and it just points to how difficult things were before proper DNA testing became prevalent. Since this case's resolution, Alicia now lives a good life under a different name, and throughout the entire process she managed to keep her identity a secret so that she could fully move on from the past. And even though Toni's murder was never solved, this case still offers some sort of a happy ending for our once missing person. Shocked would be an appropriate word for how the family of Deborah Deans felt when she presumably left her 4 children at the age of 29. On January 19, 2004, Dean was at her sister-in-law's Kimberly Hancock's house when the two began to argue. Getting frustrated with the argument, Deans called a friend who came to the house and picked her up. And this would be the last time that Deans would ever be seen alive. Many in her family assumed that the stress of her life had caused her to run away. After all, she had 4 kids, and she was only caring for 2 of them at the moment, with the other 2 living with her grandmother. This was mainly because of Dean's financial struggles and the fact that she had just recently been released from prison. Dean's life clearly wasn't easy, and perhaps having kids was just too much of a struggle at the time. A situation like this isn't unheard of, as many people choose to flee their current lives to completely start over. And in Dean's case, this actually appeared to be confirmed shortly after her disappearance. Deborah supposedly called Kimberly Hancock and told her that she could not handle the stress of her current life and that she would not be returning anytime soon. Despite the shock of it all, due to Hancock's statement, many settled on the conclusion that Deans was alive and well and simply living a brand new life. But for authorities, Hancock's story seemed a little too convenient. For starters, Hancock couldn't name any details about the car that had picked Deans up. Also, they had clearly been fighting on the day that she had last been seen, potentially providing a motive for her murder. And the fact that Deans had only called her, and not her mother or anyone else she was closer with, is actually quite suspicious. But suspicion is all that it was, as the case quickly became cold. It wasn't until 2019 when detailed information about the case was posted to a Facebook page that the case would actually become solved. On December 20th, 2019, an anonymous Facebook user emailed a detailed account of where Dean had gone to the owner of the page, Fighting Crime News and Who's Wanted. The email stated that Deans had been murdered and that her body was wrapped up and buried behind Hancock's home. After the anonymous tip was sent into the police, her body was found exactly where the sender had said that it was. Further evidence proved that after the argument Deans had had with Hancock, Hancock had killed Deans and buried her in a shallow grave in her backyard. Adding more shock to this crime was the revelation that Hancock had actually murdered her own father many years prior. And even more shockingly, her stepbrother had mysteriously been murdered as well, with the killer never being caught. But now with Hancock's proven history of murdering her family members, one could assume that she may have had something to do with it. Although the end of Deborah Dean's story is a sad one, her family can take some comfort in at least having closure on the case. And with Hancock behind bars, perhaps they can feel a little safer at night. Okay, so when I was doing research on this, The Independent posted an article about this case, and this is the picture that they used. Bruh, the disrespect of it all. Oh my god, you got enough pixels there. In 2000, a Croatian woman named Jasmija Dominic disappeared from her family's home. At the age of 23, Jasmija had apparently told her family that she was moving to Paris in order to work on a cruise ship and to travel the world. Her family legally had no control over her, so they stood back and let her go, hoping that one day she would return. That day would never come. 5 years after she had first left, the family had not heard a single word from her. No letters, no calls, no appearances. The family offered all sorts of theories on where she could have been, but that just left authorities searching all over for the missing girl. Eventually, this search would become halted, as years would go by with no credible leads on the case. It wouldn't take long for authorities to grow suspicious about Jasmija's family, as they found it strange that they had reported her disappearance so late. Also, their stories of where she could have gone never seemed to completely match up. But after searching the family's home and doing some investigation into them, no evidence was ever found linking any of her family members to the disappearance. With the way that Jasmija had supposedly left, there was really no way they could tell where she was now, and they would just have to wait for her to contact them. And with that, the case went cold for nearly a decade. That was until February of 2019. In the home where Jasmija Dominic had grown up, a big storm had caused all of the power within the home to be shut off. While in the house, outside family members of Jasmija noticed a strange smell coming from the freezer. Assuming that some of the food must have turned bad due to the power outage, a family member opened the door to reveal the body of Jasmija. After a swift investigation, police had concluded that Jasmija's sister, Smihana, had murdered her back in 2000 after a minor dispute. Smihana had hit Jasmine over the head twice with a blunt object and killed Jasmija instantly. Rather than turning herself in or calling the authorities, she promptly told her parents, who helped her cover up the murder. They put her body in the freezer and purposefully misled police into investigating dead ends. The body was hidden in their own home for nearly 19 years until it was eventually discovered. Smihana has since been charged with murder and has been put into prison, while Jasmina's body was finally given a proper burial.